Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is Sonship Establishment, and this is going to be session number 11. We're going to start right off with the verse that we've been looking at, Romans 8:17, and you can see it here on the PowerPoint. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ, if so be that we suffer with Him, that we may be also glorified together. And I might as well go ahead and read that next verse to you, verse 18. For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. So what I want to do is take the things that we were looking at last time, recap those very quickly so that mentally we're all on the same page, and then we'll move right on into this material. So here it is. Number one, everything in our sonship education / edification, which is the same thing as being conformed to the image of Christ, is tied to our suffering with Him in various manners that are equivalent to how Christ suffers today in the dispensation of grace. We've been talking about this for the last 2 weeks. Number two, the degree and extent of our heirship with Him, and we're talking about our joint heir inheritance, not that heir of God, will be determined at the judgment seat of Christ. Number three, the basis for determining that inheritance will be by the amount of equivalency in our sonship lives to that which Christ is presently suffering. And then this last one, you could just say, therefore, the degree to which we suffer with Him is the degree of the reward of our inheritance. So when these opportunities come along, if you make the most of all of them, you can have 100% of the reward of that inheritance. If you're only going to do it half the time, you're only going to get 50% of what you could have had. I mean, that's what I'm talking about when we're talking about the equivalency. And we discussed that last time. Now, just to put this in a perspective that everybody can understand, if our response to the sufferings of this present time are improper, there will be no reward in your joint heir inheritance. Yes, you'll still have an heir of God inheritance, but no matter how many Bible classes you've gone to, no matter how much you've learned about the creature, that joint heir inheritance is contingent upon that one issue. And that's the issue we've been driving home here over the last couple of weeks. I'm saying it to you this way so that you understand, and let me just back up here just a second to verse 17, so that you understand how critical that condition is, if so be that we suffer with Him. Now, that's why it's important. You got a question, Karen? Is that the effectual working to suffer with Him? Is that the effectual working? No. But it will. That is the means by which effectual working will happen. So, yeah, close. Now, there are some folks, and I'm going to talk to you about something that we haven't talked fully about before, but we have talked about it a little bit, and that's this. Sometimes people, because of the idea that we have, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. I know you're all familiar with this. Because of the way that we were taught about what's going to happen at the judgment seat of Christ, this idea that when we would stand before the judgment, God would look at the good things that we did and give us a reward, and then, the bad things, we might suffer some loss of reward. He's going to balance it all out. Now, all of a sudden, you realize because of your two inheritances, you only have those two, who gets the heir of God inheritance? All right, you've got that down. I'm so glad. Now, who gets the joint heir inheritance? The ones that suffer with Him. That's the only condition to that. And that means, and again, I'm going to capitalize with because our minds want to think for, suffer with him in the things that he is suffering in this dispensation of grace. And we got into some of that last time. So, but here's what I want to make sure that we understand is that people have the idea that when we get to heaven, someone even said this to me one time. They were talking about someone that had, let's use Doc for example. Let me just ask you the question and see how much you understand about this. Remember Doc used to come and he sat right down there where Bob is sitting, and he had that lounge chair. We should have ordered about 30 of those, right? So you could just see, yeah, you'd be passed out in here. Doc knew there was a thing called sonship. He did not, get very far. He was the least of those that got into sonship orientation. Just got to Romans 8:14, and Well, let me ask you this: do you think that Doc knows more about sonship right now than you do? Okay, Teresa's shaking her head no, and I know that, by the way, it's so good to have you back. You're shaking your head no, and I know that there's a thing, you're saying no.
He knows more.
You're thinking he does know more.
He knows more, but not benefiting from more.
Okay, why do you, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Teresa, but I understand exactly what you're thinking when you say that, because you may be right. But the other people that are saying, yeah, he does know more, they may be right, they may not be right. You may be right.
Well, we don't know. We're not there yet.
There you go. How will Doc, why is it there's a possibility Doc may or may not know more than you do right now?
Because he was accelerated. The majority of the people up there have never had sonship. They don't even know what the word means.
Okay. And they would have to learn about it the same way they would have learned here. I mean, here's the point I'm trying to make. Just because they got to heaven did not mean God suddenly took all the knowledge about sonship and put it in their head and made them fully educated sons or daughters. Correct? Paul's up there. Now, someone said, what are they doing up there? They're not in the heavenly places, right? They don't have their glorified body yet. That doesn't give them to anybody until the blessed hope. What are they doing up there? They're waiting. Huh?
Strumming their harps.
Strumming their, or as I said last week, strumming their clouds sitting on harps. Remember when I fouled that up? That they're up there, and is it possible that they're fellowshipping together? Absolutely. Is someone talking to Paul? I guarantee you. And if they're talking to Paul, you know what? All of a sudden, they're hearing some things that lets them know, I'm not familiar with this.
They're in training just like we are.
Yes, now they're hearing things. Now, there is no, I don't want you to give you the idea, there's a remedial class in heaven. There isn't. But the reason I'm stuttering is because I'm going somewhere with this, and I'm trying not to jump over into it before I build you up to it properly. But I hate it when I do that. Out in eternity, I've got my mind together now,
Okay.
much as I can. Out in eternity they're going to see what's happening in the creature. They're going to know.
Do they suffer with Christ up
Anything? No, they're not suffering with him up there. No. Yes, Teresa.
Don't you think, and of course that all it is we think, and but now that they're up there, where people here on earth, they are given to the humans doubt that is he really there? Does God really exist? Does this really exist? Well, now that they're up there, they're saying, okay, this really is here, and this really is. I mean, they're in a whole different level than we are of knowledge and understanding of that. There are heaven, there is heaven and hell and stuff.
You would have the pretty much assurance that what you heard up there is going to be right.
But
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's no doubt. Yeah, you're right. So yeah, that is a different component for them. The point I wanted, and I think you all understand it just from me asking those questions, there isn't this automatic influx of knowledge that makes everybody fully knowledgeable just because they went to heaven. That's not the case. All right. Now, everybody with me on that? All right. So, having said that, that's why you can't afford to put off your sonship education until you get to heaven. If someone says, okay, I don't know it all here, but when I get up there, I am going to continue to learn some things, and I'll just learn it when I get up there. Would that be okay? Well, I mean, it's going to have to be okay for somebody that chooses to do that, but what I'm about to tell you is, again, this issue that we've talked about a little bit, but I have more of it nailed down now than I did before. And so this is what I want to discuss with you. Out in the creature, when we're put in our positions in the heavenly places, there are going to be people out there who are part of the body of Christ, who have glorified bodies, who are out in the creature, who for whatever reason are not engaged, were not engaged in sonship at all. Either they never heard about it, or they heard about it and they didn't believe it, or they heard it and they may believe it but they didn't think it was a big deal, or for whatever reason. I told you before, they will not be occupying places of authority. They won't be principalities and powers or thrones. That's true. Do you know why? Because, well, let me ask, why? Why won't they be occupying those? They don't have it. They can't run the creature. They don't know what to do.
They haven't been adopted to that.
Sorry?
Been adopted to that position either.
Well, they've been given the status of adoption, but but I think what you're saying is they've never gone through the education that adoption meant for them to have. When they got saved, they did get adopted. Your father was saying, I want you to come and work in my business. Yeah. But did they get educated? No. So they're not going to do that. And you say, well, what happens though when they go through time and they learn some things? Because they will obviously observe. God is not going to give people a stupid pill so that they just blank out and they don't learn anything in eternity. They're going to be completely saved, body, soul, and spirit, yes? They're going to have a glorified body. They're going to be up there. Are they sanctified? Yes, they are. So it's not like they're in a position where they can't learn anything. Yes, they're going to learn some things. But here's the deal, and I don't know how far their education can go. It's going to reach a limit. You know why? Because the things that they will learn will be the things they will be able to observe and to some degree be involved in. But there's things happening way above them they will never see. I don't know that they're ever going to know that, Bud.
When you talk about that Christ is suffering right now with us, or that we suffer with Him,
Right.
He's suffering something in the dispensation of grace.
Yes.
Then, whenever the rapture happens, He will quit suffering, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so these people that are with Him right now in heaven, are they suffering with Him up there the same as we should do down here?
No. No.
That's where our crown comes from.
Well, yeah, that's where your joint heir inheritance comes from. See, when you to answer that, the suffering that you're going to go through may include, as Paul talks about in this next verse, the sufferings of this present time. That includes a whole lot of things. What Christ is suffering right now is not pain and agony. We think of His suffering on the cross. He's not undergoing that kind of suffering now. He is undergoing a suffering, in other words, remember we talked about that other use of the word suffering. He is what? Allowing. He's enduring. There are some things, we're going to talk about this today, so we can, put that issue in a way where I think we can all see it. And so this idea, though, that I'm going to wait till I get to heaven to get this, is not going to work. And I'm going to give you a 1, 2, 3, 4 here. I did this. Here's one. If a son waits to be educated, number one, he will never obtain a joint heir inheritance. Now, that's a consequence of saying, I'll just wait till I get to heaven and I'll learn what I need to learn when I get up there. I'm going to get an heir of God inheritance, and that's good enough. Number two, he will never occupy a seat of authority in God's government in the heavenly places. Listen to me carefully. He will never. Those are going to get assigned at the judgment seat of Christ. He's not going to be, by the way, if you say, but he's going to be learning for all eternity. Well, guess what? So will you. In whatever seat you're in, so will you. Here's the third thing. He will not be glorified together with Christ. Remember, that's exactly what the verse says. If we suffer with him, that we may be also glorified together. That won't happen. If a person, I'm trying to get you to see that if a person decides to wait on their education, there's a huge loss involved in that. They're not going to get a joint heir inheritance. They're not going to get a seat of authority. They're not going to be glorified together. And I've got one more. He'll never be allowed to function in certain areas of the Father's business. What is going to happen? Wherever he is placed in the business is the place he's going to occupy for eternity. And it doesn't matter how much he knows. Have you ever been involved in a business where there was somebody in a what we would call a lower end of the business, but they knew a lot about the business? But there they are. That's how that's going to be. It doesn't matter how much you know, there is nothing that the Bible says. There is nothing the Bible says where God's going to come to somebody after 1 billion years into eternity and say, you've really learned, I think I'm going to go ahead and put you in a throne now. We don't have that. If someone says, well, the Bible doesn't say he won't, you can't base a doctrine on what the Bible doesn't say. It also doesn't say you won't grow rabbit ears. So you can't go around preaching that you might. You understand? That just opens up an entire Pandora's box of what ifs. That's crazy. What you have to do is you have to go by what it does say. Now, anyway, now let me just take you to this next one here. All I'm saying is that if you're going to get this education, the wise thing to do is to get it now. You can't just say, I'll worry about it when I get to heaven. Now, I know I'm kind of preaching that to the choir here. You've been involved in it this long, and that's not a shock to you. But what I did want to clarify is, yes, people will get more knowledge as they go through eternity, but it won't change any of those things for them. Okay. Now, verse 18. Let's go back now and look at these two verses. Oh, by the way, I do have something to talk to you about. Because of how we're going to, this is kind of out of order really with the notes, but that's okay. I'm just going to, I need to make sure I saw what this next PowerPoint is. I don't want to just change the subject because you're going to be running the creature. And we know that the creature is everything. Let's make this the whole creation. And then in that creation, here's the earth. The creature is everything in the creation minus the earth. It is literally the body. We've covered that. It's the body. When Jesus is seated out here as the head of the body, the Father and the Spirit are going to be on the earth. After the millennium, Jesus will turn the kingdom over to the Father. He'll assume His position in the heavenly places as head of the body, and we'll be seated with Him in heavenly places. This because Jesus is the physical manifestation of God. Jesus represents the body. Remember what Jesus said? If you've seen me, what? You've seen the Father. He's the physical representation. Just as you have God in a tripart being, you have Father, Son, and Spirit. You are a tripart being, body, soul, and spirit. So the Son represents the body. The Spirit, well, that's an easy one. That represents the Spirit. The soul is the Father. So you have body, soul, and spirit. Those three things constitute the whole creature. And we talked about how the creature has to be able to not only respond to its own body, to other parts of its body, it has to be able to respond to the soul and spirit as well. That's part of what we do in the dispensation of the fullness of times. When we gather together into one, all things that are in heaven and on earth in Him. That's part of what we're going to accomplish. But my point is that as you get ready to do this and you watch this creature really begin to function, you are the life of the creature. You're not only going to deliver it from the bondage of corruption, but you're really going, I almost want to say, you're the central nervous system for the creature. You're what's going to make it all work. I'm going to show you this next slide, but to introduce it, let me just say this. I did a little research because I didn't just know these things off the top of my head. I mean, really, they're just... Actually, this is a little further on in the deal than I thought, but this... For you to just get out of your car, open that back door, and walk into this room, do you realize how many millions of synapses are firing in your brain to make that happen? You don't start reaching for the door handle before you get out of your car. That happens. Have you ever noticed when you eat, your fork goes in the food and you open your mouth at just the right, most of you, at just the right time?
And you hit your
Have you noticed that?
You actually hit it.
You don't bite before your fork gets there. I mean, if you did, you know what you'd know? Something's not firing right in there. Everything's not, it's not responding properly. Just to go through that back door means that not only are there millions of little impulses that are firing in your brain, they're firing in an exact order. Something's guiding your feet. You're walking up to that door and you're putting your hand out, you're turning that handle, you're backing up as you pull that door open. Now, you don't even think about that. You just do it. Well, I have some numbers that I'm going to give you in just a minute, but I want to just show you what this looks like. This is a picture, and by the way, the notes that you're going to get today, I actually printed this picture in your notes, and I want you to notice this, there's little arrows. Can you see those arrows? Okay. What's happening is, here's a neuron, and it's receiving a signal. See, signals are coming in, and then it's firing to another neuron down here. There's two ways your body carries messages. Two ways. Electrical impulses and chemical impulses. Your body either uses chemicals to transmit a signal or it uses an electrical. You actually have a charge in your body. And really, that charge is part of life. It really is. You ever notice you can water it? Well, not out here so much, I don't guess, because you have wells that just pump it out of the ground. But up in the Metroplex, where all the water comes through a water system and it's all treated. You can water your yard with that and it'll keep your yard alive, but just let it rain one time. And do you know that yard goes nuts after a rain, and you just have to water forever with the other water. Do you know what the difference is? The water coming out of the water system is dead. There is no electrical charge in that water. But the water that comes out of the sky has an electrical charge in it, and it matches up with the electrical charge of the grass and the weeds and the whatever else is on the ground, and that stuff just goes really well. I mean, it's just like a supercharged water. Well, your body has a charge as well, and there's electrical impulses that go. And this little thing right here, this shows the chemical transfer. These little chemicals that are here, the fire comes down and then they just drop into little slots. I mean, it's almost like playing a game. You ever done that deal where you're trying to drop the ball in the little holes and, and all of that's just happening in you. Now that's to run this body. Imagine what it's going to take to run that body. We were talking before the service today, and they were saying that the Milky Way galaxy is 100,000 light years across. Now, how big is a light year? Light travels at 186,000, a little more, miles per second. That means the sun's 93 million miles away. It takes light about 8.5 minutes to get here. 186,000 miles per second. Per second. And that means traveling at that speed, it would take you 100,000 years just to get across our galaxy. And you understand that the distance between our galaxies are bigger than the galaxies. So in the creature, you may have a galaxy that looks something like this here, and then down here you'll have another galaxy that, looks something like this, and they're just spinning around. And the galaxy is this big. The space is much bigger, and then guess what? You're somewhere in that galaxy. We're in a solar system in this galaxy, and we're a long ways from the other stuff in our solar system. And our sun, we're 93 million miles from our sun, and from the next star, which is Alpha Centauri, we're 4.3 light years away from the next nearest star in our own galaxy, which means we'd have to travel 186,000 miles every second for 4 years and 4 months. For 4 years and 4 months, you'd have to travel 186,000 miles per second, 24 hours a day, to get to the next star in our galaxy. And this thing's 100,000 light years across. And then, as we were talking, the article said, but they discovered a big galaxy. This galaxy is, do you remember the name of it? Andromeda. Andromeda. That one is 4 billion light years across. 4 billion light years across. Pack a lunch. How big is this creature? And guess what? You're going to run it. What will it, if all of that has taken place in you just to get out and walk through the back door, what's going to have to happen out there to get this whole creature now functioning the way it's supposed to? That's going to be incredible, isn't it? So I wanted to show you, this is the picture. I love this. There's the impulses, the electrical impulses firing, going from one neuron to another. And you understand, these neurons are close. I mean, when you're talking about just looking at them in proximity, It's all happening right up here, right? That's close. That's all going on right up there. So it's going from one to another. It's registering, firing it out to the places it needs to go to. They're all registering it, firing that out to the places they need to go to. And not firing it to the places you don't need. That's the incredible part. When you reach for the door, you don't ever kick your leg out, you know, because, oh, I fired to something for my leg that I didn't, you know. You reach for the door, your other hand doesn't go, woo, because something fired off up there, you know. It's going exactly where it needs to go. And I'll tell you another thing about Sandy. No, I'm sorry. It's going exactly where it needs to go, and it's not going where it doesn't need to go. Now, I told you I would talk to you about speed. The slowest transfer of those nerve impulses are in your fingertips. And in your fingers, those impulses are traveling at about 1 mile per hour. Now you say, well, that's not very fast. But it doesn't need to be very fast. It's not going a mile. It's going from here to here. Okay? Now, but here's the thing. By the way, you know that's slower because if you've got a pan of cornbread out on the top of the stove and you're wondering if it's hot, you put your hand on it, but you don't instantly know, do you? I have grabbed that handle forgetting that it came out of the oven, and then about the time I've got it up, now I'm getting the signal that this is hotter than I want to be holding. But I told you that I would talk to you about the fastest place, which is the neurons that are in your spinal column. And in your spinal column, they're traveling at 268 miles per hour. That is a lot faster. Now, how fast is 260? Now, and again, it's just going from here, to here. But it's going at 268 miles an hour. Do you know if a car flew by you at 268 miles an hour and you're standing still, how long would it take it to go that far? It goes not long, okay. It would seem instant, wouldn't it? The time would be so small, you wouldn't, that's how this is firing. Now, I'm going to tell you, that's what's happening in these bodies. But when we got out into the creature, how big is this creature? That's huge. That was the whole idea of talking about this other stuff. Do you know that the communication from one end of the creature to the other is going to be almost instantaneous among you members of the body of Christ? I mean, Teresa's going to be on one end of the creature. Oh, Teresa is on one end of the creature, and Karen's on the other end of the creature. And just expand this out to get it out to the far reaches of the creature. And you know what? If what Teresa's doing needs to be received by what Karen's doing in her part of the creature, but Milt doesn't need to get it, guess what? There won't be anything sent to Milt, but it'll be sent to Karen, who will then send it to Beverly, who will then send it to Bob. Well, not Bob, send it to Norma. Bob, okay. And so send it to Bob, and you know what? And whoever needs to get that to make this creature do what it's going to do, that's going to all happen just, like that. This is an amazing thing. And you're going to be able to communicate that way. I want to talk to you about the number of neural connections. 100 trillion neural connections in your brain. I don't know if you understand how big a trillion is. A trillion is huge. A trillion is huge. Do did y'all, I did a deal on this. When I did the heavenly places, if you watch those discs on the heavenly places, I showed you about 1 trillion there. I talked about if the difference between 1 million and 1 billion, and the difference between 1 billion and 1 trillion, and I was saying, you know, on a length of measurement, you know, how far would you say? In other words, you know, if I'm trying to think how far that was. Let me just think for a second. I want to say this was 18 inches. If this starting point is 1 million, and you have a line that goes out here, and this is 1 trillion on an, that's a little more than 18 inches. Sorry. Okay. On an 18-inch line from 1 million to 1 trillion, where would you place 1 billion on that line? Huh?
Next to 1 million.
That's right. It's going to, if these dots are only 1/4 of an inch, 1 billion is going to touch the dot for 1 million. Just to give you an idea of how big 1 trillion is compared to 1 billion. So I'm telling you there are, now 1 million's a lot, 1 billion is a lot more. Now on this scale it doesn't look like it, but we could back this up and do thousands and billions, and where would million be? It'd be back over here by the thousands. And then you know, 1 billion looks big. But when you go to the next one, you have to slide billion over here because trillion is so much bigger. You have 100 trillion of those things in your brain that run all the stuff that's going on in your body. That's you. I just want you to look at that. That's you. In fact, that's milk right there. You know how I can know? Because it has white hair. You can see it. This is what's going to go on in the creature. It might be microscopic in your brain, but it's going to be, compared to the creature, guess what? You will be microscopic compared to the creature. Did you watch those Men in Black movies? And it shows the little alien, he's shooting marbles, and those marbles are worlds. You know, and then it zeroes in on the marble, and then it, you know, and, oh well, never mind. You didn't see it. Forget it. And each neuron, I want to get this right, each one of these neurons is connected. Each one is connected to 10,000 other synapses. And that's what I was showing you in that one right there. That's that electrical impulse. That's the synapses. You know, when that connection is made. See right here, the synapse. That's that connection that's made, either through the electrical or the chemical thing. You know, I'm trying to turn it into a science lesson, but you got 100 trillion of these, and each one of those is connected to 10,000. Do you know how many possibilities you have? This gets huge. Again, all I'm trying to do is say that when you're up there in the heaven, in fact, I got to looking at this, and it occurred to me, I thought, we're never going to get any time off. What, are we ever going to get a vacation? Because you say, well, maybe the creature will sleep. Well, you know what that means? Only some of you will get a rest, because when your body's asleep, guess what? Something's still running your lungs, and something's still running your heart, and your liver's still working. And as you get older, your bladder is still working. And all that other stuff is still going on. And I'm thinking, are we going to do that? In fact, I had a discussion with some of the guys up in Glen Rose about, they were saying, well, what about this and what about this? And we were talking about it, and I thought, now, first of all, work will be different. You do know that. You're going to be in a glorified body. It's not like you're going to be in this body going like, please, I need a break. That's not going to be it. And you can be, I do believe this, you can be as involved in the work as you want to be, because you're going to be judging angels. You're going to be sending out angels. And in a minute, I'm going to show you someone else that you're going to be ruling over that's also going to be doing things that you're going to instruct them in. And if you don't want to get involved in it, you don't have to. But if you want, you can get as involved in it as you want to get. When we go up and tear down Satan's stronghold, Bob Summers went over to Germany, and when they tore down the Berlin Wall, he brought me back a piece of the Berlin Wall. And it has some of the spray paint where they had graffitied on that wall and stuff. You can see on the flat surface it still has some of that graffiti on it. Just a little piece of history. Well, here's the deal. When you go up to tear down those strongholds of the adversary, maybe you're going to say, I want to get involved I want to put my hands on this personally. I would like to say, I didn't just oversee it. I'd like to say, I helped tear that thing apart. Then you can. If you say, I just don't want to, you know what, I'm just going to oversee, then you'll be able to do that. But it's not going to be work the way that we see work now. And that's the point I'm trying to make there. I've got this in your notes. We've already talked about this. 100 trillion is the member number. And that's a lot more than the stars even in our galaxy, 100 trillion. And then the human brain contains about 10 billion nerve cells or neurons, and they're each connected to about 10,000 synapses. There, folks, is as good as I can get to show you the creature. Yes, the earth is sitting in the middle of it, and you can look at the pictures from the Hubble telescope and say, boy, there's some beautiful things out there, but when this creature is up and running, it's going to be more magnificent than it ever was just looking at it from now. And from here, you just look at it and you just see dots of light. Now, when people want a telescope, and I have a couple of telescopes, I have one real good telescope, but if you're going to use a telescope, you really don't want to look at stars, because all you're seeing in your telescope is a brighter light. There's not anything to look at. It's just like someone shined a light in your telescope. What you want to look at is the planets or the moon. And if you're looking at those, then you can see some things. But when you're looking at a star, you're just looking at light. But when you're looking at whole galaxies, when you're out there though, you're going to be looking at whole galaxies and at nebula and other things that are out there. You're going to see some pretty amazing sights. And then you're going to be positioned in this creature. And remember, I told you before, I want you to think of this whole creature now being cut into a 24-slice pie. Because you're going to wind up in one of those slices. And you're going to occupy a position of authority that looks something like this. At the head is going to be a principality. And really, I don't like the way that this is looking. It just occurred to me. That's how a pie slice would go. But actually, if you were going to represent it correctly, you're just talking about a single principality being over that whole division. Powers, there will be more than one of those. You'll have even more thrones, even more in the position of might, and even more in the position of dominion.
Can't you see God saying, well, I think I'll give this section of pie to the Monaghan's group, see if they can screw it up.
And his confidence would be well placed. You know what? If you look at and you're just going to. I mean, as we overlay that there, you're just going to run that section of the creature. But now here's something else. The timer's up, so let me just say this. Scientists have always said, that they see, that's what made them think there was a big bang, that the universe is expanding. They're thinking there was a big bang and stuff came into being, and first it was just microscopic and it blew up, and since then everything has been retreating away from itself. I'll tell you when that happened. It happened when God stretched out the heavens. Is this universe expanding? I think it is. Do I know that scientifically? Personally? Of course not. But I don't doubt that the universe is expanding because I know what's going to happen in the creature, not only in the earth, but in the creature. As you go out into eternity, that means it never ends. Let me tell you something else about that. We ought to talk about it when we come back from the break. Because something interesting is going to be happening that's going to affect you out in the creature. So that's a good place.